Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, statements coming at ya, statements coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Christine Patrick. I'm your host tonight. Jen Extra-Lesson is going to join us a little bit later on in the show as our co-host. And we're continuing our series of interviews of speakers that are going to be at Contact in the Desert, and you can find out all about that at contactinthedesert.com. And I've been chatting with who we're going to be interviewing tonight, and this is Robin Maxwell, and she's doing something that I really would like to do someday, and that she's done deep research and then turned it around into, popular novel, forms, which I think is great. A lot of people can't take the raw, dusty, dry history like I like it, and she's making it interesting and making a narrative, and I'll read the introduction. Robin Maxwell, historian and Los Angeles Times bestselling novelist and screenwriter. She's been obsessed with ancient astronauts since her first encounter with a UFO in New Jersey at the age of 2. I hope she tells us about that. That's great. Since then, her passion for extraterrestrial life has expanded exponentially to include Atlantis and antediluvian civilizations throughout the world, genetic intervention with our species, and Planet X. Having veered back to Earth to make a name for herself, coming down to earth, right, within the historical fiction genre, Robin has won multiple awards with her 10 critically acclaimed and best-selling novels. Her debut novel, The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn, has been translated into 16 languages and is now in its 24th printing. For her newest title, Atlantos, The Early Erthe Chronicles, Book 1, Robin has abandoned Elizabethan and Renaissance Europe to return to her original and abiding obsession of science fiction. Her inspiration and main historical source for this deeply researched novel set on Earth and Mars in a much earlier period, 10,000 BC to be specific, her resource is Plato, his dialogues, the Timaeus and Cri. But other deep influences have included Graham Hancock, Erick Von Daniken, and Zecharia Sitchin. And so, Robin, I hope you're with us. More of anything that I might have missed in that introduction.
No, that pretty much covered the basics of it. I've gotten more deeply ensconced in the earlier periods. For many, many years I was writing 15th and 16th century historical fiction, and I covered historical figures such as Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I, Henry VIII, Leonardo da Vinci, Grace O'Malley, the Irish pirate and rebel, and I kind of went closer to what you call literature. I did a novel about Romeo and Juliet. In fact, it was the first novel ever written, a historical novel ever written about the Romeo and Juliet story. That was called Oh, Juliet. And then the last novel that I wrote before I wrote Atlantos was called Jane, the Woman Who Loved Tarzan, and that was the first Tarzan classic ever written by a woman, and it was endorsed by the estate of Edgar Rice Burroughs. And it basically told this Tarzan story from Jane's point of view. And anyway, when I was finished with that, I kind of I allowed myself to go back to one of my passions, and that is the earlier time. And I had been researching the pre-diluvian world for many, many years, for decades, in fact. And I wrote my novel, and in fact, it's a rewrite of a novel an expansion of a novel that I wrote in the year 2000. And when I went back and took a look at it after Jane, I realized that it was, even though it was 550 pages, it was about half as long as it needed to be to tell the story of the rise of the origins of Atlantos, the rise of this great civilization, and then the degradation of the society, and the fall and the final destruction of it. So now it's, Atlantos was published last year, and I'm within spitting distance of finishing Children of Ra, which finishes out the story. So by the end of the year, that book will be published.
Well, I would agree with you. It probably would take that many pages just because of it's such a broad period of time and kind of an unknown period of time. You can't depend on people's base knowledge about that era to help, push the story along, I would imagine.
Right. Right.
I want to mention it's Atlantis, Atlantos, for
right.
people who want to Google that and find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming you're on Amazon. Or yeah, great. Because
also
it's a little bit different.
Barnes & Noble. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Awesome.
And it's
okay, so they're looking
in paper. Yeah, right, Atlantos. And it's available in paperback and Kindle and Audible. There's a really wonderful Audible, audio book, and by the end of this month, it will be available in CD and MP3 audio, a physical audio book as well.
Oh man, that's really good. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm going to read this now. Now that I know it exists,
oh, good.
Because this is the whole area that I, poking around in. I came to various means of research. So much ends at Atlantis and starts at Atlantis, and we just, I think mostly what people know about Atlantis is that it was some kind of advanced civilization that had some kind of catastrophe, and
some kind of what? I didn't hear.
Some kind of catastrophe.
Oh, catastrophe, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that it's
all
it's
we know
somewhere...
about it. We know, yeah.
Go ahead.
We don't know where it was, but we, everything that we know about Atlantis. I mean, in my opinion, because look, there are lots of people who channel Atlantis. Atlans, as I call them, as opposed to Atlanteans. But I have chosen, I think because I've always been a researcher and I have a somewhat scientific bent, and so I have chosen to stick to whatever I can from Plato, from his two dialogues, and even though I have a couple of my protagonists as ancient astronauts, they are from a planet X rather than a distant star system, and that's because our own technology here on Earth right now hasn't figured out wormholes, hasn't figured out interstellar travel. So I thought because, I'd been looking into Planet X, and even before the recent NASA astronomers rediscovered what a lot of us have known for a long time, that there was another planet in our solar system that has a very long elliptical orbit. I just decided that, that I wanted my gods, the Poseidon and his brother Athens, to come from another planet in our solar system. To me, that was most realistic. I'm just, that's my take on things. I like to make it believable and realistic as much as I am able, so that, I just think that these days people who read, especially, read science fiction, they want something to hold on to that they can believe is possible. And that's how I feel. So that's how I've made my creative choices.
That sounds pretty good from a, as far as like evidentiary point of view, from a good like composite of, like you said, your Graham Hancock, Erick Von Daniken, Zecharia Sitchin. They're really kind of in the same space of saying that with some good solid, research behind them.
Yeah.
So I mean, okay, can you give us a quick, 1,000-page, right? Quick plot summary, just to kind of introduce the basic, idea of the story, because a lot of our audience members are kind of familiar with, Zecharia Sitchin and all those kinds of works, but I'd be interested to see kind of what angle you took, what story, what kind of people did you decide to focus on to carry your story and introduce all these concepts?
Well, if you start with what Plato said, okay, his basic story is that the god Poseidon comes to Earth, and he is given for his portion. And he, there are other gods, but Poseidon is given the island or the continent of Atlantis for what he's going to be able to govern or rule. And Plato also says that Poseidon falls in love with, has intercourse with, and has children with a woman named Cleito, and that she is a primitive woman. She's basically an earth girl. So we've got a god and an earth girl getting together, and then they mate, and they have, and this is the key, they have 5 sets of twin sons, and that's the chances of that genetic probability of that's close to nothing. So I asked myself a number of questions. Is if a god, an ancient astronaut, came to Earth 12,000 years ago, it would be pre-flood, because we all know how Atlantis ends. The story of Atlantis ends with the destruction by flood. So I went back to previous to the last ice age ending. So Poseidon comes, he falls in love with this earth girl, and they have 5 sets of twin sons, and then they gather peoples together, and Poseidon builds the city of Atlantis. And Plato is very detailed. I mean, when it comes to his characters, what I just said is all he tells us about Poseidon and his woman and his children. He gives us the names of the 10 sons, the first of which is Atlas. But that's all he says for the moment. And then he goes into an enormous description of this ringed city, this circular city of concentric ring islands, and interspersed with canals, and then a central canal, and there's a temple to Poseidon on the central island, and there's a racetrack, and that goes all the way around the outer ring island, and there are gardens and boulevards and temples, and then he describes the plains that surround this city and how they are planted and how they are also intersected with canals that irrigate them, and he tells the dimensions of everything. So, the canals are 100 feet wide and 100 feet deep, and so all in these descriptions, things that Plato seems to take for granted are kind of mysterious. For one thing, how did an advanced being, whether he's a god or an astronaut, and a primitive woman end up with 5 sets of twin sons? And that's kind of where Zecharia Sitchin's work comes in, because he's the one who talked a great deal about genetic manipulation, and so I add that into my story, and he talks about this fantastical city. And if we're talking about Stone Age people, 12,000 years ago, Neolithic tribes are all we have. So if we have one man and a lot of primitive people, how is a city going to be built, this fabulous city? And so the conclusion that I came to is that he had advanced technology, and so that comes into play. And the other mystery that Plato sets up is that, and this goes toward the end of the saga, that a city that was once, or a culture, a society that was once a utopian society. I mean, this place had everything, and the people were really kind of top-notch, and they were ruled by fair laws, and there was no greed, and there was no violence. And then at a given point, the civilization starts to break down, and it becomes corrupt, it becomes greedy, it becomes violent, and finally Poseidon goes to war with Athens, or Atlantis goes to war with Athens. And so this was one of those things where Plato didn't explain very much. He didn't explain anything, didn't explain why Atlantis went to war with Athens. So when I was trying to construct this story, I thought, well, why would he go? Why would Poseidon go to war with Athens? And I thought, well, maybe Athens isn't a city. Maybe Athens is a person, a man. And what if it's Poseidon's jealous brother? And so it's another way to invent conflict. And that's what I did. There are these giant holes. There's always holes in history. I found that when I was writing historical fiction in the 15th and 16th century, and there are big enough holes there, and that's only 500 years ago. When you go back 12,000 years, you've got massive gaping chasms. And so, there was a lot that I had to invent, but I always strove to keep it realistic and believable, and that's pretty much it.
What you're saying is ancient history has giant plot holes.
Yeah,
and you have to use a lot of creative license. But it sounds like you took clues from the story, because, the other thing is the other's a plot hole, but then it picks up later where a different set of things are happening, and you have to connect the two. It's like you have to make a segue.
Exactly. Yes.
That makes sense. Okay, so that's that's fascinating because, I know this. What we have to work with besides we have one of the things that makes me think I lived in a former life was the fact that when I was a young kid and heard about the Alexandria Library burning, I was practically in tears. I was like,
oh, yeah. What a tragedy.
Yeah, true. Because you would have had a lot more reference material probably if that hadn't happened.
Yeah.
So, because that's where, because a lot of times people don't realize is that sometimes we only know the writings of an author because he was referenced in an author's material that we still had, we still have that in the writings referring to somebody that we don't have their writings anymore, just a snippet here or two.
Right.
So,
right.
And that's one of the things that historians, get to do is to figure that out, figure that puzzle out. But, what's cool is you're not just, sticking with the, consensus reality notion of it, making so much allegorical. So a lot of people make all these things so allegorical that it doesn't feel like it's a real thing. And you're making an assumption not only is it a real thing, but you're going back to the, space seed concept that we get from Von Daniken and, ancient astronaut theory to help put those pieces together because you're right. A floating city, right? I know just enough about maritime stuff. I lived on a boat for 7 years and lived in a harbor and was able to experience, how, maritime life exists. And when I've seen these pictures of Atlantis, these concentric rings with the canals, I just have to think how brilliant that is so that you can bring the ships right in to the right places in your city and how efficient that was. And a lot of people, we were talking about this yesterday with one of our guests, a lot of people make this assumption that at this particular time people are just paddling around in canoes, but they really actually had very advanced seagoing culture. When people look at the design of a Greek trireme or a Nordic,
right. I was just going to say
vessel.
Yeah, that's true. And Plato actually uses the word trireme. That's as the type of ships that were brought into the harbor, and that there was a huge trade thing going on with the rest of the world, and they had a navy apparently, and at the end anyway, and they went out and tried to conquer not only Athens but other cities of Europe or the cultures of Europe. So they grew very aggressive, and but no, it sounded very much like an advanced society. I mean, he doesn't, of course, Plato doesn't say, it was a culture from another planet, but that's just an assumption that I'd make.
Well, when you add the advanced maritime capability to at least the earthbound people, because of course there's people flying around up in the air too. They have some that kind of feed into what's going on, but it shows this bears out in the cross pollination of cultures all along the Atlantic rim, basically, even North America, South American very large cultures. Typically, the conquering types of civilizations typically had to have a very strong navy because that was the quickest, strongest way to be aggressive and block someone's port and bring them to their knees and force some kind of tribute or the other. Armies was important too, but they always had issues of attrition, having to march across mountain ranges and be fed along the way, and ships could just come in very quickly and very decidedly and overwhelm, different small settlements, countries, and other cities. So if they had this mass maritime culture, it also makes sense where we see, for instance, we interviewed a gentleman who believes that the early Native Americans were not just, teepee native, savage what they call the naked savage. He really hates that term that had been applied to these very sophisticated cultures much more than we've believed in the past. But he lives near an archaeological site called Poverty Point, Louisiana, and basically his name is Jeffrey Boyd Jr., and he's basically saying that the Cherokee people right there in that area had quite the trade route going. It was a way more sophisticated trade route than we've been led to believe in the past. And in fact, they were part of Silk Road. They actually had silks from the Far East that were there, and
they had
dressed
what? I'm sorry,
more.
what?
Well, their attire was influenced by like Turkey and the East.
Oh.
And they had
really?
they had a bigger city than it was quite a city made of stone. It wasn't just wooden houses or just teepees. It was a sophisticated city, and it was sitting on a trade route. And of course, South America had the wonderful big civilizations of the Aztec and the Mayan cultures, which had very large. They would have had to have had trade with the outside world. You had the Olmec cultures that were there that possibly came from Africa. So, people weren't just sitting in their own cities, in their own villages, doing their own thing. There was extensive maritime-based trade, always has been, but particularly transatlantic. And if Atlantis was, somewhere smack in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, it would be the hub, right? I mean, it even looks like it, right?
There's a big question as to whether that is the location of Atlantis, and lately there have been a lot of new theories that have come up. The most recent one, and the one that I was leaning toward when I was writing the book, was Indonesia, and have you heard of the ruins at Penang, Gunung Padang?
No, but I do know that Indonesian island apparently used to be one island, and smack in the middle of it had some kind of disaster or catastrophe and split into two. If I recall, I might be wrong about that, but that would be an interesting choice for Atlantis. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's where Graham Hancock is leaning these days, and of course in his Fingerprints of the Gods, which influenced me greatly 20 years ago when I wrote, when I was writing the first draft of this, he was thinking, well, still mid-Atlantic, and then with the shifting of the lithosphere, the whole continent shifted and became, or got into place, and is now Antarctica. That was kind of the older theory, crustal displacement, Earth crustal displacement, it was called. But in the last, over the last 20 years, there have been a lot more explorations done, and the whole idea that there are civilizations all over the world that are under, they're ruins under 100 to 150 feet of water, and that's because when they were built, they were on the coastline. And then when the last of the great floods happened, the level of the water
the water table
rose, and so anything that was along the coast was submerged, and that's why you can have ruins off the coast of Japan, off the coast of India, off, just all over the place. And there's no other explanation that they were built when they were on land, and they weren't on land before, or after.
Oh, yeah.
12,000 years ago, when the last ice age happened or ended. And there was, this new theory in Graham's new book, Magicians of the Gods, is that the final flood, a flood that took place at 12,800, was caused by a comet hitting the North American ice sheet, which was 2 miles thick, and it caused a huge flood, and that submerged a lot, and it also threw the Earth back into another 1,200-year ice age, at the end of which there was one final flood. And his contention is that it was another fragment of the same comet coming around again from the Taurid meteor area, and that caused the final flood and brought us to where we are today with our ocean levels. And
I have to say, Janet tried to come in here, so when she comes back in, she dropped back out again. She might have had a bad connection. I'm going to try to bring her in. So if I jump in here and interrupt you, it's because Janet came back in. But I'm terribly interested.
No problem.
That's good. Yeah. No, okay. So you kind of put all of those pieces together to give you your narrative. Now it's book 1. So what's plans for further ones? How many do you see yourself doing?
But book 1, it takes us. It tells us the origins, the rise of the Atlantis civilization, and that one is called Atlantos. And Children of Ra picks up 40 years after the first book ends, and it takes, because we have met the children, they're little kids when we end Atlantis, and when we come back to the beginning of Children of Ra, they're all adult. 40 years has gone by. They're that much older, but they're not old because they're at least half Teresian, from this other planet, and they're very long-lived, or they're fully Teresian. So this is where you're going to get the gods that live for what seems like forever. But anyway, it comes in 40 years after the first book ends, and it's the story of what is at the beginning a utopian society, and we see the beginning of the downfall, the corruption, the greed, the violence, and the warmongering, and we see the end of the coming apart of this fabulous civilization, and then the war that Poseidon brings against his brother Athens, and then the final catastrophe, and Plato does not explain what brings on the catastrophe. He says that Atlantis waged war on Athens, and then shortly after that, the earth opens up. So we have earthquakes and volcanoes swallowing Athens, but we have the tidal waves, the whole ocean's moving and swallowing up Atlantis. So, but he doesn't tell us what caused that. And again, I had to bring a lot of detail to my characters. I had to bring depth to them. We have one sentence from Plato, and I've got 1,000 pages to fill with these characters. So Poseidon's great dilemma is is a choice between using his advanced technology or respecting the natural world of his beloved wife. And he's got that right from the first time he walks out onto the earth and falls in love with it. And he gets it right away that high technology is a problem on such a beautiful world as Earth, and he tries everything he can to not to use it really, unless it's entirely necessary. And but his brother Athens, who spends the first book on Mars, mining as the governor of a mining colony there. In book 2, Athens, the jealous brother, ends up on Earth, and he's with and he's there making trouble, and has no compunctions about using technology, has no compunctions about raping the Earth, and it ends up that the use of technology, the misuse of technology, I should say, is the cause of the destruction of the planet. So, I've got very strong feelings about the environment and what humankind is doing to the natural world, and so that message is very much a part of the book. It's a cautionary tale.
I think it's really appropriate because I live on the West Coast, and we've been very concerned about the Fukushima situation, how much what's going on with that, and we have had dying species, and the scientists just shrug their shoulders and say, "Oh, we don't know what's causing it," and whales beaching themselves. I think on coast of California about a week or so ago was just millions of crabs that washed up dead on the beaches in their Huntington Beach, California.
Really? I did not hear that. I live in California too, yeah.
Oh, yeah, because, it's not something they still, I happen to have a Facebook group called the Earth Anomaly Research Society, and we have about almost 5,000 people, and so everyone's kind of on the hunt for these mass animal deaths and issues with the environment. So it's unfortunate to be able to not have to work too hard to find out this stuff, but it's not stuff that makes the mainstream, And so I think it's even really implied in about everything I know about Atlantis that was what the issue was, and especially if you're strongly bringing in the extraterrestrial, aspect to it. Many contactees have been told by the beings that have visited them to be careful with your environment. You've got a beautiful planet, I got Robert Hastings, who wrote a book, UFO and Nukes, now has a documentary out about how many times we've done nuclear testing and UFOs would be present,
Really?
Kind of saying, oh, yes, a story. He went deeply into that. And then all the things having to do with petroleum pollution and on and on and on, fracking, don't get me started. And we really could have made some choices along the way to, we're beginning to do that with looking at solar and other sustainable types of energy. Nikola Tesla, what he was about. It seems like we've been repeating the same pattern, where we're enamored with our technology and what we can do, but we don't, think long-term what the implications are. And, of course, then we've got this scarcity-based thing with petroleum to where it, foments war. I mean, your message couldn't be more apt, and probably the extraterrestrials would be cheering you on to say right on, because that's what they said, They've obviously, I'm sure when you have a mothership up in the sky, you've got to be careful about litter and radiation and all kinds of stuff because you're basically in a bubble right there. You know, you have to have sustainable systems to keep your living quarters, you know, unpolluted. And just because you live on a planet that looks, you know, big doesn't mean it's big enough to be a garbage can, you know.
Right.
So I think that's great. And then it's interesting to me how because it's just going right along with the rise and fall of, you know, other civilizations, how they get everything kind of going, and it's cooking. You know, they've got trade going, they've got this empire going, and it's this petty stuff that starts to develop, and jealousy and greed that takes a situation and turns it into, you know, a destruction. That's just amazing to me.
Right.
And so we're kind of drawing also from, I mean, goodness, our history is replete with, you know, people taking a tyrannical stance against their people. Right now, statistically, we really have a widening gap between the elite level of finance, you know, wealth. We're 62 individual people who own half the world's wealth, you know. And the wealth distribution is getting scarier. It was sad and humorous at the same time that the Queen was sitting there with a $1 million hat, saying that the British people needed to tighten their belts, you know, and they got, you know, the
She
European
had a $1 million hat? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, her crown. They're the crown.
Oh, the crown. Oh.
might even be $2 million. I'm not sure. You know, sitting on a golden throne, saying to the British people that these are tough times and we have to tighten our belts. And it's like a ditto with the Vatican when they wave a big gold cross around, except you have to pray for starving children. You know, those kinds of things. I mean, it's kind of ludicrous, really. And also that the average person, like we just put in a garden. And we literally had to borrow some space from someone else because we're unable to do that where we live because we're renting. It's like people have gotten away. I'm from farmer stock, you know. We've gotten away from the knowledge of living. You know, it sounds like Atlantis was living in that, you know, before it was corrupted, had figured out how to create a city and live in balance with nature because you're living on the ocean. You're very sensitive to how that works and what resources that you're able to, you know, don't pollute it because you're going to stick a fishing pole the next day and try to eat what you catch, right? You don't want to have that despoiled in any way. No, I think that's a right-on message. And then, you know, we talk a lot about the extra-terrestrial side of things here on our show. So, you know, we know that Mars and I work with anomaly hunters, and they find all kinds of crazy stuff in pictures of Mars. It really looks like a ruin. It really looks like there was cities and something on the surface of Mars, and something really nasty happened. And you know, people find domes and big slabs of concrete, and even mechanical parts, and even robotic parts strewn across the surface of Mars. So, you know, feeding into what was happening on Earth was the fact that this other solar system society was bringing its culture and issues to Earth. And that has been the biggest important thing for me to understand about history, intervention theory, is because it makes sense. I mean, we were simple humans living much like our animal relatives, you know. And I think very profoundly psychic and interconnected, like you would see the indigenous people of the planet living. And then suddenly, they're cities. Suddenly, you know? And they're doing advanced types of things to feed these cities and to keep them going. So, I mean, are you delving into speculation? So you're not going to get that from Plato. I was just wondering what your influences were on the sort of the sci-fi side of the story from the people from space that are impinging on Earth culture.
Right. Well, I saw them as human beings. I saw them as a culture that has been interfering with whatever evolution that was taking place naturally over a very long period of time. If you can picture that long elliptical orbit of Planet X, Nibiru, whatever you want to call it, that they have a great technology, but it's not foolproof, and it's not magical, and it's not beam me aboard, Scotty. It's not star travel. They have enough of technology that their ships can, when they get close enough into the inner Earth orbit, they'll send crews out. They'll send explorers out. They'll send geneticists out, and the favorite place to come is Earth, because it's got so much life. And they are a kind of a dying planet in that they're out in this long orbit that takes them into deep space where it's dark and cold, so they live under domes. And then when they come around, they do their scientific tampering with the species that has, that they've kind of helped along, so that, there are kind of these missing links in human evolution, and some of them are physiological, and some of them are evolution of consciousness, which I've been interested in for a very long time. And they are us, and they take the great apes, and over the millennium, and whenever they do come and visit, they bring us up to the next level of evolution till this most recent time when Poseidon comes, and he's the commander of this particular expedition, scientific expedition, whose main purpose is the genetic tampering with, but at this point we're Cro-Magnon man. We're not great apes anymore. We are tribal people. We're Neolithic people, and so they and I don't see that they haven't come for a number of circuits, a number of orbits, because they've been having problems with a certain mineral that makes their technology function, and they have a deficit. They have been searching high and low in the solar system for it, and it's found in great profusion on Mars. And so that when Poseidon comes with his elite scientific team to Earth, his brother Athens is the leader, the commander, the governor of a whole colony. 5,000 Teresians come and set up on Mars, which is a green, beautiful planet, with oceans and great forests of giant tree ferns. And anyway, but they're there for one purpose only, which is to mine for the mineral that they need that is going to save the home planet, which is going to keep their technology running.
Okay, I wanted to, if you don't mind me interrupting, we did get Janet back, and I wanted to make sure she got a chance to ask her questions. Janet, are you with us? Hello, Janet.
Oh,
I'm here. I was on mute. I'm talking away on mute.
Okay.
Sorry, I was so delayed. I thought I'd be done 2 hours ago. Anyway, I got to listen to a little bit about it. So you're telling us about your book about Poseidon.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get to hear the whole thing, but it sounds fascinating. You're incorporating their Mars base and describing Mars as having plenty of life and vegetation, which is what research is starting to show.
Mm-hmm,
that's even what's being revealed, let alone what's not being revealed. So that's fascinating. So I'm going to listen in for a few minutes while I kind of catch up. So if I have a question, I'll chime in. So
okay.
Go ahead and take it away, ladies. I'm right here. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, we're kind of got about 10 minutes till end of the show. What I wanted to do is find out what you are going to be talking about at Contact in the Desert. Just was there a special aspect of this that you were going to talk about that you're going to share with people that are planning to go and know about it?
Well, I'm going to discuss my fascination, my lifelong fascination with certain subjects, including extraterrestrials, the evolution of human consciousness, ancient civilizations, lost civilizations, and how psychedelic substances like magic mushrooms have played a part in the evolution of human consciousness, and how all of these subjects play into my career as an author, and how I actually came to write Atlantos and Children of Ra when I had a perfectly marvelous career as a historical fiction novelist. And all of a sudden, at this stage of my life...
Go ahead.
At this stage of my life...
Go ahead. Sorry.
You guys are talking over each other.
Anyway, that I made this decision to write about two of the most ridiculed subjects that there are, as extraterrestrials and Atlantis. I know you guys are no strangers to that, to the aspect of ridicule, and I'm finding it really interesting, coming from sort of a respected field of literature, and seeing what the response is to me and my books. I mean, there are people, lots of my friends and fans, who would never miss reading one of my historical fiction novels. They don't bother reading this. And I'm finding it interesting. So I'm going to talk about that. And I'm going to really discuss why we should be interested in Plato's story of Atlantis, and how I've adapted his story into a novel. And, that kind of thing.
Well, you certainly have...
Go ahead. Question. You were mentioning magic mushrooms, and we see evidence that the gods used psychedelics. I was watching Kundan about Dalai Lama, and his shaman would go into trance and use some kind of psychedelic mushrooms, or it might be ayahuasca, or some kind of brew like that, and he was able to save the Dalai Lama's life because he saw that the Chinese were coming, and they got him out just in time. So, if you want to say, could you elaborate more on what you meant about the magic mushrooms?
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with a writer and speaker who now deceased named Terence McKenna?
Yes. Yes. My husband knew Terence. Terence has been to our house here in Maui, and I wasn't able to be a part of my husband's life, but he and his ex used to go over to Terrence's place on the Big Island. I'll be right back. Sorry, there's a little emergency. I'll be right back. Okay.
I started listening to Terence McKenna's tapes. He did talks back probably 30 some years ago, and it was mostly about magic mushrooms, DMT, and I found it fascinating, and I experimented myself. My husband and I did with mushrooms, and then I'm trying to remember what year it was. He wrote a book called Food of the Gods, and that was about how the evolution of consciousness was brought forward by the ingestion of our ancestors of mushrooms and other substances, but in particular, he talked about mushrooms and the mushroom cultures and the mystery cultures, and that made so much sense to me because I had studied paleoanthropology, and as I said earlier, I found so many instances of the kind of just missing links or jumps, leaps in consciousness that just didn't make much sense. And he had a really good theory about it. So when I was trying to understand why an advanced person, like in the Poseidon, how and why he would have fallen in love with a primitive woman, I thought, well, what if she was a mushroom shaman? If she was one of the few people on Earth at the time who had ingested mushrooms, and so she was ahead of the game. She was highly, not just intelligent, but an advanced version of what humans were on Earth at the time, and so that it's a good part of the reason that Poseidon is attracted to her, because she's not only a woman who is highly attuned to the natural world, which he's interested in, but she can of all people understand him, and so I made her a mushroom shaman, and so that's a basic aspect of her character, and it is really the first love story on Earth, and I wanted to make it believable. So I always give people motivations and aspects of their personality so that me as a reader will say, okay, this makes sense. I can understand this. Otherwise, you've got a spaceman and a cave woman or something, and just you can't see how they could have become the mother and father of a whole advanced civilization, and
Well,
so
I have to say, a spaceman and a cave woman is the premise for a lot of really bad B movies, for sure.
Yeah.
So no, I think that's I really think that you've been thoughtful with that, because that almost bleeds through the narrative the bits that we do have about how, especially I appreciate Graham Hancock's contribution and Terence McKenna talking about, we've had this word attached to people that have simpler lives as primitive, and as anthropology has discovered over the last couple hundred years, when they've actually, interacted and studied these different indigenous tribes around the world, how some of them have tremendously complex belief systems, tremendously complex rituals. Some of them have much more richer language. With this various entheogens, which is your mushrooms and cannabis and kava, like in Fiji. That's one I happen to know the most about. this is not, hey, let's do this on the weekend and have fun, as much as it is they really believe they were getting in touch with their ancestors and the spirit world and their own ideas of the gods or God. And
right.
this puts them from their mundane, living out their existence into a higher level. Like you said, how could she understand him? With the shamanic tradition, she would have known about earlier times when the space people or the Star Brothers or Star Nation had visited the planet, because we seem to be kind of a way stop for a lot of species. It seems like this has been happening a long time and all the way to the present day. So I just think that's very insightful. So we just have about a minute or so left. If you want to tell people website information and anything else so people can find your books, and particularly this new series that you're doing, that'd be great.
My website is www.robinmaxwell.com. That's ROBIN, Maxwell.com. And there you can find everything. You can find all of my books. My homepage is Atlantos, but there are icons all along the top and the bottom that will take you to each of my books, from Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn to The Wild Irish to Signora da Vinci to Oh Juliet to Jane, the Woman Who Loved Tarzan, and in particular the Signora da Vinci. That was one of my favorite books, about Leonardo da Vinci's mother, and Leonardo, of course, and the movers and the shakers of the Italian Renaissance, and what I call the shadow Renaissance, which was what was really going on behind the scenes. What was ostensibly a Catholic world, but it was really all the movers and shakers were heretics and alchemists and Neoplatonists. And anyway, you can find all my books there, and I hope you will check out contactinthedesert.com/Robin Maxwell, and you can find my profile page and a book trailer that I made and for Atlantos, and I hope you'll all take a shot and read my book.
I think I'm planning to. You just really intrigued me with the fictional aspect. I know that reaches so much wider group of people. If you think it's fiction, it's easier to swallow. Some ideas.
It is much easier. Yeah.
That's
I
wonderful.
try to take the most interesting aspects of all the best researchers and put it all together into one big happy or two big happy books.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on Aquarian Radio. I really appreciate having you with us. And everyone go check that out. It's really great. And knock them dead and contact in the desert.
Thank you very
people
much.
People are going to be thrilled.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, aloha and goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye now. Bye.
Want entertainment designed just for you? Then check out customizable streaming TV from Xfinity. It makes your life simple, easy, awesome.
Xfinity gives you customizable streaming TV options. Enjoy the most free shows anywhere on any device, and even access your streaming apps right on your TV with X1. Go to Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit a store today to learn more. Restrictions apply.